on this Sunday night, Trump's crackdown on protests in Los Angeles. The National Guard arrives on scene as demonstrations against immigration raids turn violent.
And this seems closer to just using the military to stop or suppress dissent.
How smoke from wildfires in the prairies is clouding some of Canada's most populated areas and the health impacts.
All the evidence indicates that this is indeed the new normal.
More deadly gunfire in Gaza near a distribution point as aid deliveries bypass the UN. Plus, the veterinarians helping to save wildlife affected by the growing wildfires in Canada.
Global National, reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. U.S. President Donald Trump is once again breaking from protocol, this time by deploying the National Guard to Los Angeles in response to protests over immigration-related deportations in the Los Angeles area. Overnight and into today, National Guard troops were seen mobilizing in the streets of America's second-largest city. Officials say 2,000 have been deployed. The protests have to do with Trump's crackdown on illegal immigration and, in particular, immigration and customs enforcement agents' deportations across Southern California. This isn't the first time Trump's deployed federal forces to deal with civil unrest. Critics argue the situation should be handled by local law enforcement, not the military. Candice Cole reports on the response and the concerns some say this move raises about the state of America's democracy.
California's National Guard descended on Los Angeles after President Trump's decision to deploy 2,000 National Guard troops in response to clashes between protesters and ICE agents who carried out a string of immigration raids there on Friday. This video, taken Saturday, shows a group of demonstrators attempting to stop an ICE bus from taking off with migrants rounded up outside of a Home Depot.
They threw gas on us. They pointed their guns on us. It's wrong, man. It's wrong. We are all one nation. We are all free here. This is a United States of America. It's supposed to be for everybody.
All we're doing is trying to help our people from being separated from their families. That's all we're doing. That's all. Do you see anybody being violent right now, sir? No.
Activating the National Guard would normally come at the request of a state's governor to quell widespread disorder or rebellion. But Trump's decision came against the wishes of California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom, who says the federal government is, quote, sowing chaos so they can have an excuse to escalate.
It seems like a stretch. When I think about the National Guard, I think about the 1992 Los Angeles riots. I think about when President Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1965 sent in the National Guard during the Civil Rights era. And this seems premature and closer to just using the military to really stop or suppress dissent.
Governor Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, both Democrats, have come under sharp criticism by Trump and other Republicans, accusing them of stopping local law enforcement from stepping in. But the LA County Sheriff says at least 100 deputies have been on the ground since Friday to keep the peace.
We are going to support any other law enforcement agency that's asking for help. The help is if they're under violent attack or something of that nature, not because they need help picking somebody up under doing just strictly civil immigration enforcement.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has even threatened to send in the Marines to stop further demonstrations, a move some lawmakers fear could ignite even more unrest. Candice Cole, Global News, Washington.
Turning to the wildfire emergency in this country, from British Columbia to Quebec, huge swaths of Canada are under air quality warnings tonight as wildfires burn through some communities. In Manitoba, more than 18,000 people have been forced from their homes. At least 9 out-of-control wildfires are closing in on remote communities in central and northern parts of the province. And just across the border in northwestern Ontario, people living in Sandy Lake First Nation have been ordered out as a fast-moving wildfire is burning just 10 kilometers from the community. In a post today, Prime Minister Mark Carney said Canadian Armed Forces aircraft and personnel have been deployed to support emergency airlifts to get people out. The good news, cooler weather and some light rain is said to be helping the fight in some areas across the prairies. But as Dan Spector reports, there's been little reprieve from the huge blanket of choking smoke smothering many parts of this country.
Wildfire smoke is still lingering over the Montreal skyline, but this is actually a vast improvement from a few days ago when the city's air quality was among the worst in the world.
We came in and it was super hazy.
Super hazy.
Couldn't see much.
I was up here on Friday and you couldn't see the river or the bridges. You just saw those buildings that you see in the foreground, and everything else was completely hazy.
Environment Canada has lifted special air quality alerts for Montreal and Toronto after urging people to stay inside on Friday and Saturday. Smoke from wildfires in Manitoba and Saskatchewan spread all the way east, leading many to think twice about being outdoors on a hot and sunny summer weekend.
I was supposed to go to downtown to go dance salsa with my friends, but we canceled it. We stayed home.
Even our southern neighbors in the United States Midwest have been contending with thick smoke, among them environmental scientist Paige Fisher.
It can be really frustrating and feel a little bit unfair to people who are exposed and at risk of suffering, adverse health effects because of wildfires that they didn't contribute to in the first place.
All the evidence indicates that this is indeed the new normal.
Dr. Jill Baumgartner says poor air quality this time of year should no longer come as a surprise, even thousands of kilometers away from wildfires.
The fires are more intense, and they're happening for longer durations.
These repeated episodes have changed how epidemiologists think about the effects of wildfire smoke on the population.
Now we're studying it from the epidemiology side much more as a longer-term exposure because it is happening more frequently.
It's changing people's lifestyles and in some cases, how they go about their livelihoods.
Masks and HEPA air filters could become more popular during wildfire season as its effects continue to impact lives on both sides of the border. Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
Montrealers will be hoping for clear skies in more ways than one, both in the weather and on the roads, as a major transit strike is set to start tomorrow. Bus and metro service in the city will be heavily reduced as 2,400 maintenance workers walk off the job for a 9-day strike. Service will continue during the high-traffic Grand Prix weekend, June 13th to 15th. Workers are demanding better pay and working conditions. The city's public transport agency says with 1.1 million commuters daily, it's trying to mitigate the blowback of the labor stoppage. First, it was Canada Post. Now there's turmoil for another delivery service in this country. DHL Express Canada has locked out its workers across the country in a labor dispute. Unifor, the union representing 2,100 workers, says the company locked them out just after midnight. This after talks to reach a new contract deal fell through. In response, the union's members from truck drivers to warehouse workers are now all on strike. The labor unrest comes as Canada Post's 55,000 workers take their own job action. They're refusing overtime as a dispute between the Crown Corporation and the union over contract negotiations remains unresolved. In southern Gaza tonight, another deadly attack near an aid distribution point in Rafah. Witnesses say people were gathering to collect food when gunfire broke out. The Hamas-run health ministry points the finger at Israel for firing on civilians. It says at least 12 people were killed. Israel's military says it fired warning shots at people who approached its forces. Independent verification is hampered because journalists are not allowed inside aid distribution zones. What is clear is both Israel and the U.S. are now bypassing traditional channels, particularly the UN, to deliver humanitarian relief. Taria Isri explains.
Gazans desperate for food ducked for cover as gunfire erupted near an aid distribution center. This woman says she lost her husband. He didn't do anything. He was just trying to feed our children. The Israeli military says it fired warning shots at people approaching its forces. We went to the aid point, says this injured man. They let us in, then tanks and soldiers surrounded us. It's the latest deadly confrontation involving the new organization, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, backed by the U.S. and Israel, and meant to bypass the United Nations, which they accuse of failing to stop Hamas from stealing aid.
The UN and the nonprofits on the ground have criticized this foundation as being ineffective, discriminatory.
Israel had also vowed to block an aid vessel destined for Gaza on Sunday. It set sail carrying a well-known passenger, Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg.
The moment we stop trying is when we lose our humanity.
La situation horrible.
Prime Minister Mark Carney calls the situation in Gaza horrible. Last month, he threatened to take, quote, concrete action with Britain and France unless Israel halts its offensive. But 3 weeks after signing the joint statement, there's been no movement by Ottawa.
So the situation overall has deteriorated. More IDF soldiers have been killed. More deaths of Palestinians.
Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand returned from a trip to the UK and France this week.
Canada is going to continue to work with our allies in order to ensure the dignity and security of Israelis and Palestinians.
Like Carney, she offered no specifics when asked what actions the federal government is willing to take to try to do that. Taria Isri, Global News, Montreal.
Russia says it intercepted and shot down at least 10 Ukrainian drones dispatched overnight targeting the capital, Moscow. It's the latest in the ongoing drone warfare between the two countries. Last week, Ukraine successfully launched dozens of drones thousands of kilometers inside Russia. Those surprise attacks had reportedly been supervised personally by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The drones were hidden in these containers and smuggled in Russian transport trucks. Today, Zelensky spoke about those attacks.
Yeah, we used cheap drones. They knew exactly where to hit, and they did it exactly what was in their idea, step by step. They did very clear this operation. And they didn't know anything. They didn't know what will be in the roofs, and they didn't know just when it will, because they didn't know what will be. That's why they didn't know when it will be and where.
Zelensky says Ukraine shot down at least a third of Russia's strategic bombers, but the U.S. military is challenging that claim tonight. The Pentagon says around 20 bombers were hit, about a half of what Ukraine claims it struck. In Colombia, a presidential candidate is in critical condition tonight after he was shot at a rally. Video shows 39-year-old Senator Miguel Uribe Turbay being rushed into an ambulance. He was shot 3 times, twice in the head, during a campaign stop Saturday afternoon in Bogota. It's unclear how many assailants there were, but police have arrested an armed 15-year-old boy in connection with the shooting. They're also working to understand the motive. Habitats turned to ash. Coming up, the rescue efforts as injured birds are showing up off-season at a Manitoba wildlife haven. Recent wildfires throughout the country have wreaked havoc on communities and forced thousands of people from their homes. But they've also dealt so much pain to wildlife, with their habitats now up in flames. Marnie Blunt has a closer look at what kind of harm these animals endure and the alarming trends their human rescuers are starting to notice.
A call from Majestic, an aptly named bald eagle, rings out through the grounds of Wildlife Haven, a place of refuge and healing for sick, orphaned, and injured wildlife in Ile-des-Chênes, Manitoba.
He's losing a lot of feathers and is quite tattered.
Helping animals like this common nighthawk heal and regain strength. But there's something unusual about seeing this species of bird this time of year.
Typically we don't see them at all this time of year, so the fact that we have 2 in care, 2 that just came in, and 4 more potentially on the way is raising some alarm bells for us.
Wildlife Haven's rehab manager Carter Phillips says the raging wildfires are pushing birds and wildlife out of their normal habitat.
So they're seeking refuge elsewhere, and as they're coming more towards the city and more towards urbanization, the more likelihood there is for them to come in contact with windows, car collisions, basically just more human-caused issues.
And in some cases, like with this nighthawk, it's a threat to an already endangered species. Other animals also showing injuries from the fire.
We had a purple martin come in the other day. Unfortunately, all of the feathers were fully singed.
Zoe Nakata says calls to the Wildlife Haven have increased 50% since the start of the fires. The impact even more critical this time of year.
Especially this time of year where we're seeing animals are nesting, they're taking care of their babies.
Last month, Black Bear Rescue Manitoba took in a cub injured in the Lac du Bonnet wildfire.
She came in with all 4 paws badly burned. She had some burns on her nose and her lip, and the top of her back was the fur was singed off, and her big problem though was her lungs and her respiratory system.
The cub sadly didn't make it. The rescue says thousands of animals will perish in these wildfires, and those that survive will be impacted by having their habitat, food sources, and dens devoured by fire. Nakata says we're just in the early stages of seeing the toll the wildfires are having on wildlife.
It's really sad to think about the long-term impacts of all this destruction. I can't help but think of nestlings. So all of these babies that are in dens, that are in nests, where the parents were not able to get them out.
A grim reality that will be revealed once the flames die down. Barney Blunt, Global News.
The razor-tight Stanley Cup final ahead, teeing up the Oilers and Panthers battle to take the lead in Game 3. Toronto's Summer McIntosh is tearing it up at the Canadian swimming trials in Victoria. The 18-year-old 3-time Olympic gold medalist smashed the world record in the women's 400-meter freestyle by more than a full second. It's also the 4th long-course world record she set. And to Toronto now, where former Blue Jay star Jose Bautista was inducted into the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame over the weekend. He gave an emotional induction speech, thanking everyone in the Blue Jays organization for helping him reach his potential. The 3-time Silver Slugger and 6-time All-Star was one of the sport's great power hitters during his 9.5 seasons with the Jays. But Bautista might be best remembered for his go-ahead home run and bat flip against the Texas Rangers in the 2015 playoffs. One of the greatest moments in Blue Jays history. This year's Stanley Cup final is off to one of the most electric starts in NHL history. The best-of-7 series is tied at 1 game apiece after the Edmonton Oilers and Florida Panthers each won an overtime thriller. With the next 2 games in Florida, Slav Kornick reports from the Panthers' home arena in Sunrise, Florida, as the Oilers continue their quest to break Canada's Cup drought.
The Stanley Cup Finals has arrived here in Florida. Game 3 going down here at Amerant Bank Arena on Monday night. The Oilers will be looking to regroup after a tough double overtime loss on Friday in Game 2 that saw the Florida Panthers tie up this series. And it's been a very close series for just the 6th time in Stanley Cup Finals history. The first 2 games went into overtime, and there have been just a total of 77 seconds where the 2 teams have been separated by more than a goal. The Oilers have played well on the road during this playoff run. They have a 6-3 record away from Rogers Place, but during last year's Stanley Cup final, they managed just 1 victory here at Amerant Bank Arena in 4 games. They'll have to win at least 1 here on the road during this Cup final in order to become the first Canadian team in 32 years to win the Stanley Cup. Reporting from Amerant Bank Arena in Florida, Slav Kornick, Global News.
Underground smoke, 0 visibility, and seconds to act. Next, how mine rescue teams train for the unthinkable and use those skills in competition. Mining is a critical part of the Canadian economy, but it's also a high-risk job. Many mines are in very remote parts of the country. Others are in regions being affected by wildfires right now. This weekend, in an effort to draw attention to the importance of mining safety, a group of experts launched an unusual competition at an abandoned mine in BC. Paul Johnson reports.
Darkness and smoke. Obstacle-laden terrain, and a life-or-death situation where seconds count. How would you make out with odds like that?
They pumped a bunch of smoke down there so that we couldn't see very well.
That's Jake McDonald, a young mining engineer currently working a silver mine in remote northern BC, with the nearest town a 4-hour drive away. You can see why in British Columbia, every mine maintains its own mine rescue team, and rescue teams require practice.
BC has the safest mines in the world.
And that's certainly in no small part due to the kind of training you're seeing here. The 67th annual BC Mine Rescue Competition. This year, a field of 11 teams gathered at the Britannia Mine Museum near Squamish to build the kind of muscle memory you need in the event of a crisis.
We are, extracting tons and tons of minerals from the earth, large machines. Accidents do happen.
Given the size of the sector here, BC's been remarkably free of major mine disasters. But when they happen, they can be catastrophic in scope. 26 miners died in Nova Scotia in 1992 after an explosion underground at the Westray coal mine. And the world was riveted in 2010 when Chileans drilled an elevator shaft to rescue their miners after a cave-in. It's the kind of good news story they want if these teams are ever called to action.
We walked away with a lot of learning experiences more than anything, and very, very happy to be here and back at it.
In Britannia Beach, Paul Johnson, Global News.
Important skills there that hopefully won't ever be needed. That is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada showcases the Notre Dame Cathedral Basilica in Ottawa, a patriotic wooden bear sculpture in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, and Heart's Delight Islington, Newfoundland and Labrador. Keep them coming. Send your pictures of Canadian pride to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Donna will be back with you tomorrow.